Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Saturday, April 6th slate of college basketball DFS. That is right. It is finally here, the Final Four, which is kind of bittersweet because it's obviously going to be two great matchups that are going to lead us into a hopefully great national championship game, but it also signifies the end of college basketball. And so here, what we did here on this slate is because, there's a long lead up into the Final Four with there only being the Elite Eight games on Sunday, and then an NIT semifinal on Tuesday, and then, the NIT final, and then this game on Saturday. So I had a lot of time to really research this slate, research these four teams, and dive into the weeds and get a lot of information, a lot of X's and O's, a lot of game theory, a lot of ideas on how to build successful DFS lineups here for this slate. I think this is one of the most well-researched slates that I've had all season because of the amount of time we've had leading up to it and because it is only four total teams. So here in this episode, we are going to break down both of the games themselves. We're going to tell you what you can expect from each game from an X's and O's and box score standpoint, and then tell you how you can use that to build a successful DFS lineup around both of these games, whether you are playing on DraftKings or FanDuel. Now, like I said, this is a little bit bittersweet because this is near the end of college basketball season. So if you've been with us all season, I really appreciate you being with us, and I hope that you hit that subscribe button so that way you can be with us next season. And please hit the like button for this video if you have ever been helped by these videos over the course of the season. But also, I hope that you'll find some other content we do as well. Next week is a big week for us because if you do not know, next week is Masters Week at Augusta National. One of my favorite sporting events of the year. In fact, I would probably have it March Madness 1, the Masters 2 in terms of the sports calendar. So one of my favorite weeks of the year. We're going to have a ton of content coming your way for the Masters. So if you're subscribed to the channel, you can be with us through all of that. And then we're going to carry right on over into the rest of the PGA Tour season and then right into preseason NFL and football coverage, and then right up into that season. And then before you know it, we're going to be back for college basketball. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Make sure you stay with us in the off season because we're going to be around. We're going to be doing our thing, even if it will not be just for college basketball. All right, so with that being said, one more thing. I will be back for the Monday night showdown slate for DFS. So no matter what the matchup ends up being Sunday, sometime I'm going to get out an episode where we can break down the national championship game, break down the showdown DFS slate, and tell you how you can build winning lineups for that. So make sure you're back for that as well. That will be the last college basketball episode of the season. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead and the introduction there and let's and dive into game number one, the clash of the Titans, I'm going to call it, Purdue versus NC. All right, so as we talk about, game number one is going to be between Purdue and NC State. I'm calling it the Clash of the Titans because you have a matchup between two centers that should just be absolutely tremendous. I do have a theory about that once we get into the weeds here. But you've got DJ Burns of NC State taking on Zach Edey of Purdue. Two different body styles, two different pedigrees, but they're both here in the Final Four. In fact, both these teams are just an absolute clash of stories to get here, right? NC State, you have a team that was written out, was just done for. Their coach was going to get fired, and then they rattle off a few games in the ACC tournament. Boom, they're in the NCAAs. Keep their hot streak going. Now they're in the Final Four, whereas Purdue, last year, they had the colossal disappointment of losing to Fairleigh Dickinson. If they've been able to rebound, just be a juggernaut in the regular season and into the postseason and enter the NCAA tournament as a one seed, and really until the Tennessee game, we're not really all that tested in the NCAA tournament. So just two totally different paths to get in here, which is part of what makes the NCAA tournament great, part of what makes the Final Four great, is you get stories like this where there's contrast between these two teams and how these two teams play basketball and how these two teams have gotten here. So that's kind of, my hype tape, I guess you'd call it, for this game. But I'm looking forward to this matchup. I really am. And honestly, as someone who lives in the state of North Carolina and knows a ton of NC State fans, it's hard not to be excited for the NC State Wolfpack and what that team and that fan base are going through. It's a fan base that's been pretty starved for success for quite a while now. And so really happy to see them here, really a fan of their run. They're just a really likable underdog story, and they're going to be big-time underdogs heading into this game. I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say that this would probably be the biggest upset in the history of the Final Four, like the semifinals, if NC State were to beat Purdue. I don't think that would be an exaggeration. So in this game, according to Ken Pom, they are projected to be 1-70. So that victory by Purdue by 11 points, which is a total of 151 points in the game, which is pretty solid. Like on a 12-game slate, that would probably be like the second or third highest total among all the games that are out there. But it is actually the lower total of these two games. It's the lower total by 13 points, with the Bama and UConn game being at 164. Now, what's interesting is that in NC State's 9-game run, only 3 games have hit that total. The game against Oakland, which required overtime, and then the game against UNC and the game against Louisville, both of whom were top 60 tempo teams in KenPom. So really, NC State doesn't have a lot of games that go over that mark. And Tennessee held Purdue to 72 points, which is about as good as you can do against Purdue. So, like, really, for this game to get to that total, it's going to be a lot of offense, right? It's going to be NC State having to try to outscore Purdue. I don't think it's necessarily all that likely that this game ends up shooting up into the 160s and the 170s in terms of the total. Now, on the NC State side, ironically enough, Mohamed Diarra is their highest priced player, but that's really interesting to me because he is not an elite scorer. He is not a usage dependent player. You know, with this NC State run, they've played 9 postseason games now dating back to the NCAA tournament, and Mohamed Diarra has only taken double-digit shots in 1 of those 9 postseason games. In fact, he's only had a 20% usage rate or higher in 2 of 9 postseason games. So this is a guy who is not shot dependent at all. If anything, you could say that he's rebounding dependent. His defensive rebounding rate of 31% is the 3rd highest in the nation. So when you're looking at Mohamed Diarra from DFS perspective, you want to play him in games where he gets a lot of rebounds. And so before you click him into your lineup on Saturday's slate, ask yourself, do you think Mohamed Diarra is going to get a ton of rebounds? If you think the answer to that is yes, then play him. If you think that the answer to that is no, then don't. It's also important to note that he dealt with foul trouble in their most recent game against Duke. He only played 22 minutes, had 4 fouls by the end of that game, only put up 13 fantasy points, only grabbed 7 rebounds. That foul trouble led to a lot of minutes for Ben Middlebrooks. Ben Middlebrooks played 27 minutes against Duke, which is the most minutes that he has played in the postseason run, seconded by 25 minutes against Louisville. Middlebrooks also put up 21 fantasy points in that game against Duke, which is a really solid total for him. It was his highest in the previous 3 games. Now, with Ben Middlebrooks, he mainly plays more minutes if Burns or Diarra gets in foul trouble, right? And some of you might see where I'm going with this. They're going up against Zach Edey, who is number 1 in the nation at drawing fouls, has the potential to set the all-time single-season record in free throws if he shoots a ton in the Final Four game and potentially a national championship game. So I think Ben Middlebrooks makes a lot of sense as a play in this game because I think it is quite likely that Mohamed Diarra and or DJ Burns are going to end up in foul trouble. So when you're constructing your DFS lineups, construct it with that in mind. I would not want to put Diarra and Middlebrooks in the same lineup. Why? Because Middlebrooks' path to success requires Diarra being on the bench. So just keep that in mind when you're constructing for this NC State team. Now, another thing that's interesting is that when Diarra did not play a lot of minutes against Duke, Michael O'Connell saw the biggest boost in rebounding rate. He grabbed 11 total boards against Duke, en route to a 32 fantasy point performance in 39 minutes played. This is not a guy who generally takes a ton of shots, but this is a guy who has played over 30 minutes in every NC State postseason game. You're getting a guy who you know is going to be on the court, and he's another guy that, like Ben Middlebrooks, if you think that Diarra and Burns are going to be dealing with foul trouble, he's a guy who's going to pick up the slack with the rebounding. He also has quite a lot of upside in terms of his assists. He's hit 6 assists in 3 of his last 4 games. So I do think that Michael O'Connell has a lot of upside if you can construct a lineup that makes sense for him to be constructed in, right? So, if you play NFL or college football DFS, right, one of the biggest things people talk about is correlation, where, can you play a quarterback and 2 receivers, and receiver on the other side so that the game shoots out and all that, right? Everybody's trying to get correlation within their lineup. Well, on a 2-game college basketball slate, I also think it's incredibly important to get correlation. And so I think that with seen so far, the 3 guys we've talked about, if Mohamed Diarra is not going to play a lot of minutes, or if Mohamed Diarra is going to be dealing with foul trouble, you are going to see to Ben Middlebrooks and Michael O'Connell. So that might be something that's correlated where I wouldn't want to play Diarra with O'Connell or Middlebrooks. Now, we got to talk about NC State's 2 leading scorers, though. The first of which is DJ Horn. He is their most well-rounded offensive player, in my opinion. No disrespect to DJ Burns, but He's got not as wide of a skill set as DJ Horne. So DJ Horne is just a really solid offensive player. He's really shifty, really creative on the perimeter. He can score from three. He can score from mid-range. He can get to the rim and finish at the rim pretty effectively as well. Now, the only game that he has played in the NCAA tournament where he had less than a 27% usage rate was against Oakland. And why might that be? Well, Oakland played a lot of zone. A guy like DJ Horne, an alpha scorer, it's kind of harder to get them the ball and get them in situations where they can score against zone because they're going to be going up against a help defender pretty much every time, right? So with that being said, DJ Horne, when he's gone up against man-to-man defenses, which is probably what Purdue is going to play, he's been really, really good. Over 29 fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 games, the only one of which that was under 29 was that aforementioned game against Oakland. And we just saw Purdue struggle to guard Dalton Knecht. And Dalton Knecht, as a 3-level scorer, really had a lot of success against Purdue as kind of like the alpha scorer. And I think that DJ Horne could be pretty much in the same way, right? Like, he's a guy who is really good as a scorer. He can give you some upside in the peripheral stats as well, averages over 3 boards and 2 assists. But if DJ Horne really takes over as this team's leading scorer, you can see a big-time fantasy performance from DJ Horne. He's only $100 on DraftKings. Now, Casey Marcel is a guy who plays a lot of minutes, but doesn't always put up great numbers, right? Like, he has just kind of a middling usage rate and did not have great rates for either peripheral stats in terms of rebounding and assists. So what you're looking at with Marcel is like a minutes-based play, right? Like, could I play him and have him play 35 plus minutes and be out there, and hopefully lucky into 3 or 4 rebounds, hopefully lucky into 2 or 3 assists, hopefully, make a few shots from the perimeter as well. Like, to me, there's a very real pathway for Marcel because his rates are generally so low. I don't think he's out of the player pool, but I think he's a guy that, if you really think the game is going to like shoot out and end up being a 160 plus point total game, Casey Marcel makes a lot of sense to play because I think he needs the game total and the game environment to be better for him to end up scoring a lot of fantasy points. Jaden Taylor is the last guard that I'm going to talk about for State. He is a somewhat high usage guard off the bench, but he plays inconsistent minutes, takes inconsistent shots. I think he's a guy that you can play in GPPs, maybe contrary to DJ Horne. When DJ Horne was injured, we did see Jaden Taylor take over a big-time scoring load for this team. Near the start of the ACC tournament and the end of the regular season, he did have 42 fantasy points against Louisville and 35 against Syracuse. And I do believe DJ Horne either did not play or was limited in both of those games. So definitely a guy that you could go to as somewhat of a pivot off of DJ Horne. I would probably not play DJ Horne and Jaden Taylor together in the same lineup. Now, I did kind of bury the lead here because the guy that everybody wants to talk about when it comes to NC State, and a guy that I love, and he plays with so much joy that you got to love how he plays. And it's DJ Burns, right? He has been, a March hero, a name that everybody is going to remember for years now because of what he's done in this NCAA tournament. And he's been great, right? Against Duke, he had a 33% usage rate and turned that into 42 fantasy points. Duke had no answer for him down low. Duke also did not send a double team at his way, I don't think, once all game. So that definitely helped out that, he was going up against single coverage. He was able to just cook against those Duke bigs that just really no part of defending him. But this is about as bad of a matchup as it can be because he's going up against Purdue. He's going up against Zach Edey. And that is just a tall task, right? Literally a tall task because Zach Edey is, 7'4". Hopefully some of y'all got my pun there. So I just think that that's not exactly a great situation to target him in. Graham Ike of Gonzaga had the best game out of all bigs against Purdue in the last 2 months in the Sweet 16, the NCAA tournament, and that was 35 fantasy points. And that was going up and down. I believe he got a double in that game. I believe he had a block or 2 in that game as well. And he stayed out of foul trouble. And that requires a lot against Zach Edey to stay out of foul trouble. But here's the deal. I'm going to kind of say the quiet part out loud here. Everybody's looking forward to this Burns versus Edey matchup. I don't know if Burns and Edey are going to match up on each other. I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to do that. Here's why. If you're NC State, DJ Burns is not the most fleet of foot. He is prone to getting in foul trouble, and you need him offensively. You can hide him on Trey Kaufman-Renn or Mason Gillis and not give up a whole lot. If you're Purdue, you want Zach Edey parked underneath the rim. Well, DJ Burns will post up from the 3-point line. He'll post up from the mid post, the high post. He'll post up from behind the 3-point line. He'll post up anywhere and run as a distributor, almost like as a point center, almost how the Denver Nuggets use Nikola Jokic. Edey can't be under the rim if he's all the way out of the 3-point line guarding DJ Burns. He can be under the rim if he's guarding Hassani Diarra, who is not really a shooting threat. So I don't know if these two bigs schematically are actually going to match up against each other. If they do, I think that DJ Burns is actually not in bad shape offensively because he is so crafty and has such good touch around the rim that I think he's going to be able to get off his post hooks and his fades and his floaters, and he's going to be able to distribute the ball like he always does. So I don't think it's a bad matchup for Burns if Edey is on him. I think it's a terrible matchup if Burns is trying to guard him defensively, though. Edey is not going to be able to muscle DJ Burns because DJ Burns is almost 300 pounds. And you won't be able to get deep post position on DJ Burns because that requires, really moving him with your body, which is not going to happen against DJ Burns. But it's going to be really tough for Burns to defend Edey without fouling because it's tough for everybody to defend Edey without fouling because he's so big and so strong. So that is why I think that you won't see Burns versus Edey matchup as much as people might think. And, you can kind of take that for what you will. What does it mean for DFS? Well, if Edey's not on Burns, then I think I do like that for Burns. If Edey is on Burns, I don't know how I feel about that because that probably means that Burns is on Edey on the other end, which does not bode well for Burns. So it's just kind of a give and take game, and I think you can make the decision on that whether you want to play DJ Burns. But I would advise you again, correlation is key. Build your lineup around pieces that it makes sense that, oh, DJ Burns is having a really good game. Oh, that probably means that this guy is having a really good game or that guy is having a really good game. My favorite play from NC State overall is going to be DJ Horn. I think that if they want to genuinely beat Purdue, I think DJ Horn is the guy that is going to have to play well and have to score a lot of points. Now, on the Purdue side, obviously everything's Zach Edey, right? And I've got a theory. I think on a small 2-game slate, you just play Zach Edey, right? Just play him. Just play him. No questions asked. Just play Zach Edey. Here's the reason why. On a 2-game slate, there's a pretty good chance that he's going to nuke the slate, right? It's also pretty unlikely that a lot of the mid-range plays and the upper mid-range plays are going to hit. So what you do if you play Zach Edey is like you make one less decision, right? If you play Zach Edey, you're going to get a lot of production out of that guy, and you're making one less decision. It's one less thing you have to get right, and it's going to kind of force you into a certain lineup construction by playing him. If you play PGA DFS, it's kind of like playing Scotty Scheffler, right? Like, he's going to be high owned, but that his floor is so high and he's going to be so good. It just gives you less things to get right. And in golf, it's almost like playing a 5-player game as opposed to playing a 6-player game because you've got Scotty Scheffler locked in that one spot. I think Edey is pretty much the same way when he is on a slate. It would have been really hard for you to cash on the Sunday slate when they played Tennessee, when he had 66 fantasy points, if you did not have Zach Edey. So I think that, you can try it out for yourself. If you're somebody who plays one lineup, I encourage you to try 2 this week. Play one with Edey, play one without Edey, see how you do. But I think the easier construction this week is to just play Zach Edey, right? Like, just the math dictates that if you play Edey at 11.3 and a punt play at 3,000 and pay 14,300 for him, it's very likely that that's going to end up better than 2 7K players, because not only do you have to have those 2 7K players score a lot of fantasy points, but you have to know which ones they are. So I just think that it really makes life easier for you if you just play Zach Edey. Does that mean I'm going to go 100% on Zach Edey? Probably not. But does it mean I'm going to have quite a bit of exposure to him? Absolutely. And now, why is that statistically? Well, he's had a 41% usage rate in his last game against Tennessee. This team is absolutely feeding him the ball with the season on the line. He's had over 46 fantasy points in every postseason game so far. So just easy points, play Zach Edey. Now, one thing I did look back at, and this is when I was telling y'all I did a lot of research, right? I went and looked back and see what games Edey played poorly in, dating back to February 1st, and saw if anybody elevated their game in those instances. There were 4 games: the Gonzaga game, the Illinois game, the Rutgers game, and the Wisconsin game. And in those 4 games, Braden Smith was great. He had 50, 31, 33, and 32 fantasy points in those 4 games, all 4 of which over 4x value with the ceiling of 50 fantasy points against Gonzaga. Lance Jones in all 4 of those games was over 20 fantasy points. In the Wisconsin game was one of his season best. He had 35 fantasy points in that game. Fletcher Lawyer and Mason Gillis were up and down in both those games. They had ceiling games and not ceiling games, but Trey Kaufman-Renn played poorly in all 4 of those games. So here's what I say all that to say, right? If you are going to fade Zach Edey, then you are going to want to get somebody who's probably going to play well when Zach Edey plays poorly. And from what we just talked about, Braden Smith and Lance Jones were the 2 consistent best when Edey was playing poorly. Lawyer and Gillis had some upside when Edey was playing poorly. Kaufman-Renn was terrible when Edey was playing poorly. Now, Braden Smith, I do think can be played with or without Zach Edey. He is at his best in pace-up games because of what he does in the peripherals. So if you're looking to game stack this game, I would highly recommend game stacking it with Braden Smith. But like I said, he's just a really solid play in DFS. I think you can play him with or without Edey, with or without a game stack. I think for him to hit his ceiling, it's probably going to need to be a game that gets up and down, kind of like that Gonzaga game. But I absolutely really do like him as a DFS play. I really do like Fletcher Lawyer as well. He was really good against Tennessee, 27 fantasy points, 4 for 12 from the field, but it felt better than that watching it. He also did get you some rebounds, assists, and steals as well. It was his second game out of his last 3 where he was over 25 fantasy points, which at his depressed price tag of $5,000 is 5x value. So I really do like Fletcher Lawyer, and I think that he, again, like Braden Smith, he can be played with or without Edey. But I do want to say, especially on a short slate, if I'm not playing Edey, I probably want to get to 2 of these Purdue guys. And so with Fletcher Lawyer, in fact, let me expand that list. Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, and Lance Jones all took at least 3-pointers in both games this past weekend. So, in games where, the season was on the line, they were absolutely giving these guys 3-pointers. If NC State were to decide to double Zach Edey, then these guys would have a ton of opportunities to put up fancy points because they're going to be taking a ton of 3-pointers. Now, I do think there are a few punt plays for Purdue. We've already talked about the 2 power forwards, Gillis and Kaufman-Renn. Kaufman-Renn has actually been he was really good at the start of the NCAA tournament, but has since faded. Gillis is just up and down, up and down. You never really know what you're going to get out of Mason Gillis. The 2 punt plays that Purdue has are Heidi and Colvin. They will play minutes. If you're looking to, just pair off Zach Edey with a punt play, I think you can do worse than just going with either of those 2 guys. And they're 2 of the cheaper guys in this 2-game slate that are actually going to play legitimate minutes. All right, so that does it for game number 1. So let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then we're going to break down game number 2. All right, so before we get started with game number 2, I do want to mention there are a few places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have for me on Twitter if you just reach out to me. But also, I'll tweet out any updates for the show. And so basically, if you want to know what's going on with us and when we're going to have shows, when our shows drop, follow me on Twitter. It's a great place to start. Also, join the Fantasy Corner Discord. The link is in the description below. Fantasy Corner Discord is a community that is entirely free of a lot of really smart, really sharp people who play DFS for a lot of different sports. And we're constantly in there all day, bouncing ideas, bouncing lineups off of each other, and really just talking it up and chopping it up and having fun together as well. So, we've had a lot of success in the college basketball chat this season. We're going to be continuing that in the next season as well. But in the offseason, there's a lot of guys who are really good and really help me get better at NBA and MLB DFS. And then we've got some golf chat going on, and then we've got some college football and NFL when it gets back as well. So if you're interested in DFS, like if you play DFS, you're looking for some people to talk to or for some people to get inspiration from, ideas from, Fantasy Corner Discord is a great place to go. It's entirely free. I cannot recommend it enough. And then lastly, I wrote an article for my Patreon for every college basketball slate where I profile all of my core plays as well as my lineup strategy and attack strategy for each slate. And that is a slight charge on that one, but all the fees from that do help cover a lot of the data that I use here on this podcast. So if you're looking to show me some support, like any support financially, then that would help a ton. And so just head on over to patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. You'll get those articles on there. And I know college basketball season's wrapping up, but we do have our weekly golf articles. And then we are going to have preseason NFL and college football content on there, as well as a lot of best ball content. So if you're interested in any of that, the Patreon is where you can get access to that. And then it'll obviously be back back next college football and college basketball season. That's what most people subscribe to it for. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead now and dive into game number 2, which is Alabama taking on UConn. This one is the higher total of the night, pretty much because Alabama's playing, and Alabama just plays some absurd totals. KenPom has this one projected to be 86-78 in favor of UConn for a total of 164 points. The Grand Canyon game is the only one in the last 2 months where Alabama played in and it didn't get to 155 points. So there is a really high floor in terms of the total that this game is going to get to. There's going to be some points scored in this one. Now, that being said, it is very unlikely that the guys on the Alabama side are able to get to their averages, in my opinion. UConn ranks 315th in the nation in tempo and 4th in the nation in defensive efficiency. That is not a good combination for scoring a lot of fantasy points. In fact, they have held their last 4 opponents in the NCAA tournament and Marquette in the Big East championship game to under 60 points. Alabama is going to get to 60 because Alabama plays at an incredible pace. Alabama also takes a ton of 3-pointers. So Alabama is going to get to 60 points. Whether they get to enough to win the game, though, is another story. I see this game being a game where UConn has to play fast and score a lot of points. Alabama's going to keep scoring with them, but I see UConn winning this game of like 90-77 or something like that is how I see it. Alabama, if they want to win this game, it's going to come from jacking a lot of threes. They take 3-pointers at one of the highest rates in the nation. You know, a lot of people will point to the fact that Illinois had a really highly ranked offense on KenPom and UConn was able to shut them down. The difference between Illinois and Alabama is Illinois does a lot of their damage at the rim or in the mid-range with Shannon and Domask, and they were just not able to get to the rim and finish with big old Donovan King sitting there in the paint. Alabama is a team that does a lot of their damage from behind the arc. Donovan King isn't going to be able to do anything about those. So I do think that Alabama is going to pose a different matchup for UConn than Illinois did. But I do think UConn will be prepared for it. And I think Alabama's best chance at winning this game is going to be just getting hot from behind the 3-point line and hoping that they go in. We talked about on our bracket breakdown show how teams that take a ton of threes tend to lead to a ton of variance, right? Well, fortunately for Alabama, they've been on the right side of the variance so far, and they just need one more game where they're on the right side of the variance, and they could take out UConn if they do take and make a lot of 3-pointers in this. So who is going to be taking those threes? Well, a lot of them are going to come from Mark Sears and Aaron Estrada, and we have had this discussion all season long. I think Mark Sears is Alabama's best overall player. Aaron Estrada might be the best from a DFS perspective. And really, I think that the gap between them from a DFS perspective is not indicative of the salary, where Mark Sears is $1,000 in DraftKings more than Aaron Estrada. I think that Estrada makes for a better points per dollar play than Mark Sears in this game. Let's talk about why. Estrada has actually had the higher usage rate between the two of them in the last 2 games, in the Sweet 16, the Elite 8, games where their season was on the line. And in the NCAA tournament, Sears has taken 61 shots. Estrada has taken 58. That's pretty even, and the salaries are not indicative of that evenness. However, Sears has taken 38 3-pointers in that span. Estrada has taken 17. So because of Sears' ability to take and make 3-pointers, he's able to score more real points, and he is able to score more fantasy points that way, because you do get a slight bonus for making a 3 on DraftKings. However, what Estrada has been doing, though, Estrada has been killing Sears in the peripheral stats in this NCAA tournament. You look at the 4 NCAA tournament games for Allen's plus assists have been 15, 16, 7, and 13. Those peripheral stats have allowed Aaron Estrada that even when he's not on shooting the ball, he's still been pretty good from a fantasy perspective. And so I really do think that I would be more likely to play Estrada than Sears in this game. The concept of like the alpha guard, like the elite scoring guard going against UConn, I went back and looked over their box scores the entire season to see if there was any trend, and it's hit or miss. There's some elite guards that have played well against UConn. There's some elite guards who have not played well against UConn. There's nothing really to go off of on that one, or any trends that I could find. So I do think that there is a chance where Sears or Estrada, or Sears and Estrada, could both have a good game here in this one. But if I'm forced to take between the two of them, I'm going to take Estrada, who I know is going to take a similar number of shots at a similar or better usage rate, and will get me the peripheral stats that Sears will likely not. Now, after that, Ryan Griffin, on paper, looks like one of the best value plays on the slate, right? He's taken 20 total shots in the last 2 games, and he scored over 27 fantasy points in both of those games. That is elite level for a guy who is at $5,700 on DraftKings. Now, the problem is that Latrell Wrightsell could throw a wrench in all that. Latrell Wrightsell has been out for the last 2 games with a head injury. He left the Grand Canyon game early. And Latrell Wrightsell is statistically their best 3-point shooter. He shoots at about 44% from behind the arc, which would be a huge factor if Alabama wants to win this game against UConn. Now, near the end of the regular season, Griffin and Wrightsell were both battling injuries and really, hadn't really played together at full strength for a lot of like the end of the season, right? But what I will say is that Wrightsell, in the games that he played and finished, he has been over 30 fantasy points in 3 of those last 5 games that he played and finished. That's pretty substantial. That's a lot of upside, and he's apparently going to be back for this one. Will he immediately come back and play 30-plus minutes? I don't know. But what I'm telling you is this. If he does play 30-plus minutes, he has 30-plus fantasy point upside, especially if he is taking and making 3-pointers. So I do think Latrell Wrightsell shapes up to be one of the better value plays this slate. Now, how that affects Rylan Griffin is this. Not necessarily with the minutes. When they were both healthy, Rylan Griffin was playing 28 to 30-ish minutes, which is pretty much what he's been playing in the NCAA tournament when you kind of aggregate it out. Now, the usage rate and the rebounding rate were slightly down when Wright was back fully healthy. So I do think that if we do get confirmation that Wrightsell is active, I think I would probably prefer to play Wrightsell over Griffin by just a little bit. Now, Grant Nelson is a guy that we do have to talk about. Grant Nelson is Mr. Boom or Bust. But he's been boom or bust all season long. Like, this is not abnormal for Grant Nelson. He went from having the game of his life, 54 fantasy points, 24 and 12 with 5 blocks against North Carolina, to 21 fantasy points against Clemson, where he dealt with foul trouble most of the game. Look, that's what he does. That should not come as any shocker. However, I went back and saw if I could find the trend for the games where he booms. He tends to boom in games going up against lesser athletic centers. And I hate to break it to you, Donovan King's pretty athletic for a 7-footer, so I don't think that is a particularly great matchup for Grant Nelson. However, if Clemson switches the matchup and puts Alex Caravan on Grant Nelson and puts Donovan King on Nick Pringle, then I do think that shapes up better for Grant Nelson. I think he will be able to out-athlete Alex Caravan just a little bit. I think he will be able to shoot over Alex Caravan just a little bit. So I do think that I like Nelson more if Pringle is on the floor, because Pringle is going to be dealing with Donovan King. However, here's the problem with Pringle. You look back at Pringle's game logs, and he was not playing a lot of minutes at all when Latrell Wrightsell was in the lineup. So, like, you go back and look, like February, when Wrightsell and Griffin were both healthy, Pringle was not playing a lot of minutes. He was playing about 16 minutes a game. That's not good. That's not what you want for a guy who's $100. So if Latrell Wrightsell is back at full strength, it makes me significantly less interested in Nick Pringle. It, by peripheral, makes me less interested in It makes me less interested in Grant Nelson, because Nelson's going to be the one going up against Donovan King. Now, could Pringle have a path where Grant Nelson gets in foul trouble and then he's the one that's in the game at the 5 and he puts up a lot of fantasy points like he did against Clemson? Yes, that is absolutely possibility. So what I'm telling you is this. I'm probably playing only one of Nelson and Pringle, and I'm probably playing only one of Griffin and Wrightsell on this Alabama team. I think that it's very unlikely that 2 out of that pair end up getting there. In fact, I'm probably not going to play Wrightsell with Pringle either, because I don't think that Pringle is going to play a lot of minutes if Wrightsell is playing a lot of minutes, and vice versa. Wrightsell is not going to be out on the court if Pringle is out on the court. Usually when Wrightsell is out on the court, they're running a small ball lineup with 4 guards, where Griffin and Wrightsell are serving as the small ball 3 and 4. Now, Jaron Stevenson had the game of his life against Clemson, but can we count on that happening again? I don't think so. He played 25 minutes in that game, which was the most he has played since the Tennessee game back at the start of March, which was a game where Alabama had a lot of foul trouble and a lot of injuries and didn't have a lot of depth. And so he played an abnormal minute total. Grant Nelson was also in foul trouble in that game against Clemson. That helped Stevenson see more minutes. And also Stevenson went 5 for 8 from 3. That is not the norm for Jaron Stevenson when you go back and look at his game log. So I think that it took a lot of extenuating circumstances to go right for Jaron Stevenson to have the game of his life against Clemson. And now you could be looking at a situation where Latrell Wrightsell is back and taking a lot of those minutes. And, Grant Nelson might not get in foul trouble and might be able to play a lot of minutes. And Jaron Stevenson might not be on fire from three-point land. Like, there's just a lot that went right for Jaron Stevenson to have the game of his life against Clemson. So I will probably not be partaking in Jaron Stevenson. However, like we talked about earlier, on a two-game slate, especially if you're playing Zach Edey, you're going to have some punt plays out there. And I think that he makes a lot more sense than any of the other punt plays on this Alabama side, because Diabate and Walters could very likely find themselves out of or significantly behind in the rotation if Latrell Wrightsell is back and fully healthy. All right, now let's go and switch on over to the UConn side. So this is a team where I want to get a lot of guys from, if I'm being honest, because they're in a pace-up spot against Alabama. They're the highest projected scoring team of the slate, and they are a very balanced team, meaning that any of their starting five and really their next two bench guys could end up going off at any given moment. To me, the lineup revolves around Donovan King. He's a guy who I'm going to be very heavy on this slate. Alabama is a poor team at giving up offensive rebounds, and Donovan King has a 14% offensive rebounding rate on the season. It's really, really good. And he's shown you some upside on the season. Donovan King over 50 fantasy points in 3 of the last 5 games. That's pretty incredible. And what's really interesting is during the season, Donovan King very rarely played a ton of minutes. And a lot of that was because they were blowing teams out. And really, they just didn't have the sense of urgency that they've had in the NCAA tournament. Well, when you look at their games in the month of March, when he plays 25 minutes, Donovan King averages 42 fantasy points per game. And so now that, they're literally in the Final Four and the season's on the line, you got to feel like he's going to play 25 plus minutes. So with Alabama being a poor rebounding team and a pace-up team for UConn, and Donovan King likely to play big-time minutes, likely to be really good on the boards, this is a smash spot for Donovan King. He's one of my favorite plays on the entire slate. Now, Tristan Newton is a guy who I think will also benefit from Alabama's pace, but not as much as another guy. Keep that in mind. He put up a little bit of a dud against Illinois, Tristan Newton. Just was 0 for 6 from the field. His offense wasn't really needed. We talked about on our Elite 8 show how Tristan Newton actually excels in games where UConn is pushed or UConn is, losing. He's actually played really well in UConn's losses. And when teams try to run like a switching defense against UConn or try to ice ball screens or whatever, he tends to be a guy who plays well because he's their best in isolation situations. I don't necessarily know if that's what Bama ends up going with here in this game, but what I do know is this is a pace-up game, which is going to mean more possessions, and this is a guy who averages over 6 rebounds and 6 assists per game. So more possessions equals more opportunities for rebounds and assists, and this game gets going up and down. You got to feel like Tristan Newton is going to be scoring a lot of fantasy points. But the guy who benefits the most from pace-up games on UConn is Cam Spencer. So I went and looked back up at their entire schedule, and I looked at their games against KenPom teams who were top 100 in tempo. And UConn has played a few of them: Illinois, Marquette, St. John's, Xavier, Gonzaga, and Carolina. Those were the games. They played 12 total games in those teams, right? Alex Caravan in those games has averaged 34 fantasy points per game, which is almost 5x value for his salary. For whatever reason, when the game gets going up and down, when the game gets going up and down, Cam Spencer is at his absolute best, and I expect him to be at his best again against Alabama. He's another guy that is great from the peripheral stats. He's a good scorer as well, and if the game gets going up and down, if you score a lot of points, it's very likely that Cam Spencer is going to contribute a lot to it. He is also one of my absolute favorite plays on the entire slate. Now, do not sleep on the rest of the UConn guys, though. So Alex Caravan hasn't hit 4x value in the NCAA tournament, but he's a guy who can get hot at any time. He takes a lot of threes. He hasn't been super successful from behind the arc recently, but he's a better shooter than he's been. So if you're banking on some shooting regression for Alex Caravan, there is a chance that you could see him have a good game. Also, Alex Caravan, UConn power forward, tends to when teams play small ball lineups against UConn, not when teams are playing two bigs or are playing a true power forward. Well, Alabama, if they have Latrell Wrightsell back, will likely go to a small ball lineup, which should give Caravan opportunities to shine. So I know that the recent form isn't good, but if you want to bank on shooting regression and you want to bank on Alabama playing small ball, then there are a few reasons that you could look to Alex Caravan with a little more positive outlook. Stefon Castle is a guy that I'm quite frankly more likely to play, though. He's had over a 20% usage rate in 4 of the last 5 games. What he's done with it has been up and down. He's had 2 games over 26 fantasy points in that stretch, but 3 that were under 18. So a little bit of boomer bust, which is okay if you're playing GPPs, right? Here's what's interesting, though, with Stefon Castle. He has not played more than 30 minutes in a game in the month of March. So here's a way that Stefon Castle could hit his upside. What if he is playing well and plays 34 minutes? And sees a lot of opportunities because he's on the floor for more time than he usually is? I think it's a possibility. I think there's definitely a chance for Stefon Castle to hit his in that way because, by the way, this is the Final Four. The season is on the line, and teams will live or die with their best players out on the court. Now, that would also require him to stay out of foul trouble, which he doesn't always do. But I'm just saying, if he's out there on the court for 30-plus minutes, don't be surprised if you wake up and Stefon Castle has 40 fantasy points in that game. Now, the 2 bench options that I would be interested in for UConn are Hassani Diarra and Samson Johnson. Diarra has been the blowout king for UConn, and he's also found his way into a pretty meaningful role in the rotation. He has played 20 minutes in 5 of the last 6 games. Ken Pom has the San Diego State one as 20, so that's what I'm going to give him credit for. So in those 6 games, he's been pretty solid from a DFS perspective as well. He's only $4,400, so he doesn't need a lot to succeed. But if you think that UConn is going to blow Illinois out, Hassani Diarra is the beneficiary of the blowouts. Samson Johnson is the backup to Donovan King. So if for whatever reason you were to expect Donovan King to get in foul trouble, or if you expect Donovan King to not have to play a lot of minutes, which is certainly a possibility, Samson Johnson would be the guy that would come in and win up. Against Illinois, he played 17 minutes, was 5 for 6 from the field, put up 12.75 fantasy points, which doesn't sound like a lot, but at $3,800 salary on a 2-game slate, that's not terrible. If you were somebody who's using optimizers or making rules on the UConn side, I would probably not pair Klingon and Johnson together, and I would probably also not pair Diarra and Castle together because Diarra seems to steal more of his minutes from Castle than from Spencer or Newton. All right, so that does it for the UConn side, and that does it for all 4 teams in the four. Like I said, y'all, we really did a ton of research, dove into the weeds, and saw what edge we could find, saw what correlation we could find. So hopefully we gave you guys plenty of good information that you can use to build a winning DFS lineup for this Final Four slate. Now, if you like what you saw here on the video, please hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a ton. And if you're listening on audio, please rate and review the audio. It helps me out more than you could ever know. It helps the podcast show up in searches, helps it show up on people's feeds, and that helps me out a ton, and I really do appreciate it when you guys do that. Now, like I said, hopefully you guys have been able in this video, if you've been watching for 40 minutes or listening for 40 minutes, hopefully you've seen or heard this, but I'm really excited about these 2 games. Like, I'm really enjoying these 2 matchups. I think that the combination of the 4 centers that we've got in this Final Four is, for my money, the best 4 centers that we've seen in a Final Four. When you've got, Edey, the Giant, DJ Burns, the life of the party, Grant Nelson, the unicorn, and then Donovan King and the athletic freak. So I really, really like this Final Four slate, and I'm so looking forward to watching it, so looking forward to playing DFS for it, and I'm hoping that it's going to be a good day, and I'm hoping it's going to be a good day for you too. Now, remember, we will be back for the national championship game, no matter which 2 teams it is. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you can be back for that episode, because we'll be breaking down a full Showdown DFS episode for that slate. But other than that, college basketball season is nearing a close. So if you want to see our other content, give the golf content a try, or, make sure you're subscribed, be patient. The preseason fantasy football content, the best ball content, the college football content is right around the corner. All right, so that does it for this episode, guys. Thanks for watching and listening to this point. Like I said, hopefully I'm being able to give you guys some information that you can use to build some winning lineups on Saturday. Thank you guys for watching and listening to this point, and thank you guys for being with us for the entirety of the college basketball season, if you have been. Like I said, it's super bittersweet that it's coming to a close, but I've had an absolute blast this college basketball season, and we're going to be back next season better and bigger than ever, hopefully. But thank you guys for watching and listening to us for this episode. Thank you guys for watching and listening to us this entire season, and I will see you guys next.